Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something literally monumental. You aren't just looking at a myth here, you're looking at a survivor. We're talking about a civilization that outlasted the ancient era, weathered the Middle Ages, and drove straight into the modern world without a single definitive end. So, we're going to decode this epic, relentless engine that has powered the longest continuous civilization on Earth. Let's get right into it and see how this incredible historical engine actually works.
5,000 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long this engine has been running. To truly grasp modern China, you have to wrap your head around the sheer magnitude of what happened across those millennia. Because, listen, this history, it wasn't just some straight line of peaceful progress. No way. It was a brutal, recurring historical engine, like an unstoppable pendulum. We're talking monumental rises, violent fractures, and inevitable rebirths. It's a cycle of unparalleled wealth, unthinkable bloodshed, and constant reinvention.
Section 1. The Ancient Historical Engine.
So, to find the spark of this whole cycle, we've got to go way back to early Chinese settlements that were facing total annihilation. The Yellow River was violently flooding, repeatedly wiping out everything in its path. And out of that watery, severe chaos stepped a legendary figure, Yu the Engineer. He didn't conquer with the sword, right? He conquered the water by building an ingenious canal system. He literally saved the people. And because of that immense merit, he was named China's ruler and established the absolute core concept of Chinese history, the Mandate of Heaven. Basically, it states that ruling power isn't some unquestionable divine right. It's a conditional lease. Heaven grants power to the just and violently yanks it away from the wicked. Take Emperor Ji, for example, the last ruler of Yu's bloodline. He was a corrupt, sadistic tyrant, spending his days on drunken orgies. Under the Mandate of Heaven, this signaled that Heaven had completely rejected him. So when he was overthrown, it wasn't just a rebellion, it was considered a justified, absolute necessity.
Section 2. The War for Minds.
Okay, let's jump forward to the Eastern Zhou period, starting around 771 BCE. Out of an era of massive instability, feudal wars, and just constant blood in the streets, two massive ideas emerged. They clashed for control of the human mind in what's known as the 100 Years of Thought. On one side, you've got Confucius. Despite witnessing horrifying things, live burials, disembowelments, he still firmly believed humanity was naturally good and just needed to be nurtured. His vision was basically a massive, benevolent family, held together by respect and social harmony. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum was legalism. Legalists argued that people are inherently bad, selfish, dangerous. To them, the only way to hold society together was through strict laws and severe, brutal, fear-based control. This intense ideological clash, it was going to dictate the fate of millions.
Section 3. Unification through absolute fear.
Well, that ideological war finally exploded during the Warring States period. You had 7 kingdoms literally fighting to the death for control. And that chaos birthed Ying Zheng. He was a strict legalist driven by this ruthless desire to crush China together into one piece. But before he could, he actually barely survived a frantic assassination attempt by a man named Jing Ke, who hid a poison dagger inside a map. The king panicked, scrambled around a pillar, and just barely managed to stab the assassin. That botched attempt completely fueled Ying Zheng's paranoid crusade to become Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. His legalist cruelty was terrifyingly efficient. His dynasty only lasted 15 years, but it fundamentally forged a unified cultural identity. He standardized currency and writing. He forced peasants into severe labor to build the early Great Wall. And, paralyzed by the fear of losing control, he ordered mass book burnings and buried 460 Confucian scholars alive. He was so obsessed with conquering death that he built the massive terracotta army. But in a wild, tragic twist of fate, his quest for eternal life actually killed him. He died after drinking immortality potions that were heavily laced with mercury.
Section 4. Golden Ages and Invasions.
After the first emperor's death, that historical pendulum swings rapidly again. Let's trace this wild swing, shall we? In 206 BCE, the Han Dynasty takes over, reviving Confucianism and opening up the massive Silk Road. But then, inevitably, the empire fiercely shatters again into the bloody Three Kingdoms period. Fast forward to 581 CE, and the Sui Dynasty harshly forces the pieces back together. That severe reunification paved the way for something truly incredible. In 618 CE, the Tang Dynasty emerges as a massive, unparalleled new golden age.
The Tang Dynasty was an era of just unprecedented wealth and stability. The population exploded to 80 million people. 80 million, and its capital was the most cosmopolitan city on the entire planet. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this ancient history physically connects to your world today. If you walk into Chinatowns in major Western cities right now, you might notice they're often called Tongrenji. That translates directly to Tong People's Street. I mean, wow, that is how incredibly deep the legacy of this specific golden age really goes.
But as we know, history never stays quiet for long. So how did this sophisticated, heavily populated state fall to nomadic horsemen from the harsh northern steppes? Well, you've got to look at Genghis Khan. And I want you to just process the scale of this for a second. 20 million dead. That's basically the entire population of New York State wiped out. Genghis Khan was an outcast who survived a harsh reality and used that pain to forge an unimaginably powerful, disciplined killing machine. This staggering toll wasn't just traditional conquest, it was brilliant, ruthless psychological warfare. He would decimate entire civilian populations just to send a shockwave of pure terror to the next city, causing them to surrender out of sheer panic.
So let's see how this builds into total control. Taking China wasn't some overnight victory, it was a grinding, multi-generational campaign. First, in 1211, Genghis breaches the Great Wall and sweeps the north. Then, his grandson Monkey unleashes intense siege warfare on the south. Finally, in 1279, Kublai finishes the job, completely securing the south and founding the Yuan dynasty. For the first time in history, a non-native ruler governed a totally unified China, and they maintained control by establishing a really harsh ethnic caste system that placed the native Chinese at the very bottom.
But hey, remember our core concept? The mandate of heaven does not care who you are. The Mongols eventually lost it, and it came with another horrifying number, 13 million. That's the estimated death toll in China from the bubonic plague in the 1330s, a disease that actually originated among Mongol soldiers. This catastrophic epidemic, combined with famines, natural disasters, and just massive, desperate peasant uprisings, completely stripped the Mongol Yuan dynasty of their power in less than a century.
Section 5. The Century of Humiliation.
The pendulum swings once more. Ethnic Han rulers had reclaimed the throne with the Ming dynasty, the ones who built the iconic modern Great Wall. But eventually, they fell to the Manchus, who established the Qing dynasty. And that set the stage for a catastrophic collision, as the ancient historical engine slammed headfirst into the modern machine of European imperialism. Honestly, this collision course was completely inevitable. On one side, you have a deeply conservative Qing dynasty trying to strictly limit trade, demanding only silver. On the other side, Great Britain is financially drowning from managing its colonies, desperately craving Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. So to reverse their massive trade imbalance, the British didn't negotiate. Nope, they aggressively pushed a highly addictive narcotic, opium. The Qing desperately banned it to protect their citizens, but Britain smuggled millions of pounds of it into the country anyway, completely bankrupting the Chinese economy and engineering a nationwide addiction crisis.
When the Qing dynasty finally fought back by burning millions of pounds of British opium, the First Opium War ignited, and it was a one-sided decimation. The advanced British Navy easily crushed the Chinese forces. The result was the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, and the terms were just devastating. The Qing were forced to pay 20 million pounds, hand over Hong Kong, open major ports, and, perhaps worst of all, allow British citizens to totally ignore Chinese laws. It was a catastrophic loss of Chinese sovereignty that kicked off the era known as the unequal treaties. That extreme external humiliation triggered widespread chaos from within. In the mid-1800s, a village school teacher named Hong Shu Quan suffered a complete nervous breakdown after failing his imperial exams. During a fever dream and after reading a Christian pamphlet, he became convinced, literally convinced, that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. I know, it sounds crazy, but he militarized his cult into a massive fanatical army with incredibly strict religious laws. This sparked the Taiping Rebellion, a horrifying civil war that killed up to 30 million people and nearly tore the Qing dynasty apart from the inside out.
Section 6. Echoes of the Cycle.
Which brings us to the final, critical question I want to leave you with today. What happens when the ancient mandate of heaven meets the modern world? For 5,000 years, China was an engine of internal rise, fracture, and rebirth. But that 19th century collision brought a century of external humiliation, as European powers struck again and again. They even manufactured the Second Opium War over a lowered flag, just to burn their way to more power in Beijing, fracturing the empire like never before. I want you to consider how that deep historical memory, thousands of years of cyclical violence, compounded by foreign exploitation, laid the unshakable groundwork for the unified, fiercely protective global superpower we see today. The dynasties may have ended, sure, but the cycle's echoes,
They are absolutely still ringing. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that builds our present.